Good evening, all. Quick note on this video. There was a remarkable dearth of information available online about the actual events of the race, and equally little information-dense footage. I found the hour-long movie of the race and have uploaded an upscaled version separately, as usual, but apart from that, the only other source of any really useful information was a BBC documentary about the David Price Racing Panos entries, which I'll link to in the description below, as it had far too much copyrighted music in it that would definitely get me hit with the copyright naughty stick. It really also only had information germane to that one specific two-entry team, which out of a race with 48 entries is a bit not helpful overall. Anyway, the 65th Grand Prix of Endurance, the 1997 24 Hours of Le Mans, was held on the weekend of the 14th and 15th of June that year. Despite the failure of the Group C rule set at the beginning of the decade, the race's popularity was still enormous, with attendance well north of 150,000 and more than 30 ex-Formula One drivers competing. Coming off of a win the previous year, the TWR, for Tom Walkinshaw Racing, Porsche prototype entered by Yost Racing, was considered the race favorite, but not heavily. It faced strong competition from the new GT1 Porsches and Nissans, as well as updated long-tail versions of the McLaren F1s that had taken home victory on the marque's first outing back in 1995. The diversity of manufacturer participation was finally spreading to all classes, however, with 15 different manufacturers entered across the three classes: Le Mans Prototype, or LMP, GT1, and GT2. In addition to perennial competitors such as Ferrari and Porsche, Panos was making their first Le Mans appearance with the new Espérance GTR1. Go watch that 5-minute guide if you haven't yet. Marcos was taking another stab at competition in France with their Mantara-based LM600s. And Céline, working up to their first production car planned for the early 2000s, had two tuned Mustangs entered in GT2. The favorites in GT2 were arguably either the bevy of 911s through sheer weight of numbers, or the Chrysler Vipers, so-called because Dodge wasn't a thing over in Europe. For those of you in Europe who weren't aware, the Vipers in the US were sold under the Dodge brand name, not Chrysler. They're all owned by the same company, it doesn't actually matter. But after their strong performances the year prior. Someone from Nissan, ironically with the surname of Kawasaki, won an Audacity Award, which, if it was still being awarded at this point, I don't believe it is, would probably go to Jim Glickenhaus for sticking with things in the way that he has. Unfortunately, an accident in one of the free practices held several months before qualifying took the life of Sébastien Enjolras, a young driver racing a Peugeot prototype for Welter Racing, in between his Formula 3 appearances. Considered a promising upcomer in the sport, he was only 21. It was the first death of a driver at or associated with the race in 11 years, and remained the most recent until Alan Simonson's unfortunate passing in 2013. Qualifying saw the Yost-run TWR Porsche prototype take pole for the second year in a row, pursued closely by a raft of Porsche, Nissan, and McLaren GT1s. The second fastest prototype was all the way down in 9th place, one of the Ferrari 333 SPs. It didn't even take until the start of the race for the proverbial argy-bargy to start to occur, with one of the Dams team Panoses picking up some bodywork damage during the formation lap. At the fall of the green flag, the GT1 class cars clearly had the advantage in straight-line speed, but the TWR Porsche was more nimble. After dropping 2 places to the leading GT1 Porsche and Nissan on the first part of the lap, it was able to regain one of the places on one of the chicanes of the Mulsanne Straight, and did not lose ground from the leading Porsche 911 GT1 through the back half of the lap. The 3 cars quickly outpaced the rest of the field, building a gap of several seconds to the rest of the pursuers. In what would be a particularly high-attrition race, it took a mere 6 laps for the race to claim its first victim. The BRM P301, a heavily reworked Group C car from the beginning of the decade, continued its tradition of early failure and retired with engine difficulties despite having a new engine specifically for the race, a disappointing end to Pacific Racing's season. Only 2 laps later, it was the turn of Alan McNish to bow out after an off with only 8 racing laps completed in his Porsche 911 GT1. We also had some attempts at turning the race into the 24-hour of Rally Le Mans. As well, such as we see here when Kellner, in his GT1 Porsche, attempted to overtake one of the Nissan R390s in what looks like the exit of Indianapolis, but ended up swinging wide and doing some landscaping instead. One of the 2 entered Marcos vehicles decided it wanted to participate in ecumenical politics, and unilaterally elected a new pope, despite John Paul II being in good health at the time, while one of the Nissans had a tail-happy moment and an apparently unsafe rejoin down at Arnage, judging by the hand gestures from this marshal. One of the Lister Jags was disintegrating on track by lap 21, prompting its retirement as well. Oh, we'd also lost a Ferrari prototype by this point as it ran out of fuel after only 18 laps. That one seems like a bit of, if you'll pardon the pun, a lapse of judgment. André Pescarolo, on his 31st Le Mans outing and driving a Courage prototype, managed to get himself stuck in the gravel a little while later, although this did not cause a retirement, as some helpful marshals got him going again. The Courages would continue to struggle with handling issues throughout the race. The battle at the front end of the field remained fierce, with the Porsche GT1s showing themselves to be truly in a class of their own when it came to speed. The pole-sitting TWR prototype had dropped back a good bit at this point, but was still in the mix if the rate of attrition kept up at the pace that it had started with. The leading GT2 Viper went up in an enormous conflagration shortly after a pit stop, losing control likely due to cold tires in the Porsche curves and destroying the back end, which led to a fuel leak that ignited and defied several attempts at extinguishing before all of the fire extinguishers that could be found were emptied into the rear of the Chrysler, and finally the petrol, or at least the fuel pump, gave up. Let's take a moment to watch and see just how long it takes to put the fire out. Shortly thereafter, the Parabolica Motorsport McLaren F1 GTR nosed into the barriers at Tête Rouge on its 88th lap, the 10th retirement of the race in only 7 hours of running. At that rate, for those of you keeping score at home, one would expect a mere 15 or so competitors to make it to the checkered flag. With night falling over the French countryside, the teams settled down for the long slog through the evening and early morning hours. The Nissans were reportedly having serious issues with their oil coolers. A last-minute change to the vehicle layout meant that the coolers were relocated closer to the engine and experiencing temperatures that were so high they were melting the solder holding them together. We are reliably informed that this is considered undesirable, and the first of the R390s to retire excused itself after 139 laps, specifically the number 21 car of Martin Brundle, Jörg Müller, and Wayne Taylor. Shortly afterwards came the retirement of 2 of the 3 Panoz cars that were still running, the first David Price car due to fire, and the second Dams car due to an engine issue on laps 145 and 149 respectively. This left just the second David Price car running, the number 54 of Andy Wallace, James Weaver, and Butch Leitzingo. This actually rounded out the retirements for quite some time, and the race settled down to the rhythm of the French night. It was not until another 50 laps were completed that the Andretti-piloted Courage had an accident, leaving a mere 26 vehicles still running. The 911s continued to do well, both factory and privateer entries, but the TWR Porsche prototype was only a lap down, and therefore seemed well poised for at least an easy class victory, if not an outright win. Similarly, the one remaining Panoz had managed to make it into the top 10 by this point, before engine troubles claimed that vehicle as well. Morning's light revealed the two factory 911 GT1s still running very well, with both cars on the lead lap and separated by mere seconds after so many hours of running. The TWR Porsche prototype, at that time being driven by Tom Christensen in his Le Mans debut, was in third and 2 laps back, with 3 McLarens filling out the top 6. A 911 GT2 led its class as well, but was decidedly not in contention for the overall win. It was therefore with a mix of shock and disappointment that the race leader, the number 25 car of Volek, Stuck, and Putzen, retired as the day began, this time due to an accident that may have been caused by a broken driveshaft. Michele Alboreto was now driving the Joest TWR Porsche and took advantage of the number 25 car's retirement to go on the attack, unlapping himself from the number 26 car that had inherited the race lead, and was really pushing hard to get into a position to challenge for the outright win at the end of the race. About the same time, one of the Privateer 911 GT1s, the red number 29 car, also ground to a halt on the track with engine failure, again with flames coming from the rear end and smoke filling the cabin. The number 39 McLaren received a penalty for speeding on the pit lane, costing them precious moments in their pursuit of victory, while fatigue got the better of J.J. Leto, driving the number 42 FINA McLaren as he oversteered into the barriers at Mulsanne Corner, ending that car's race. Just a bit of flame this time, though, and this was coming from the correct part of the engine rather than surrounding it. So that's a nice change. However, continuing the parade of misfortune that this video seems to have become, the leading 911 GT2, number 78, lost a wheel just as it was coming onto the front straight, but it had enough time in hand that it was able to limp back to the pits without completely dropping from contention. The number 74 911, having won the previous year, was at the time being driven by Andy Pilgrim and inherited the lead. The TWR Porsche continued to run a clean and generally unremarkable race, something of a hallmark of Joest's preparation and general race strategy, although it received a new nose in the last few hours of the race, just staying on the lead lap as the number 26 GT1 continued to look very swift. This time it was the turn of the new GT2 leader to return to the pits with a turbo failure, which was reparable, but gave the class lead back to the number 78 Porsche. It was actually the second turbo failure of the 74 car's race. With more than half of the field already eliminated, the rate of attrition slowed, and time clicked on. The Courage vehicles continued to have some significant handling issues, but not to the point of retirement, with the Pescarolo car twice further losing it into the gravel, but never actually finding a wall. The Joest Porsche shortly thereafter set the fastest lap of the race, and things looked to be shaping up for a dramatic fight to the finish between them and the 26 GT1, but no sooner had this been realized that the number 26 car was out as well, flames claiming yet another victim, and with it, the hopes of the Porsche factory team. All that remained now was a lone Gulf McLaren, 1 lap adrift, to mount a challenge on the TWR Porsche. However, the flames demanded one final vehicular sacrifice, and with a rapidly thinning field, took its pick from the remaining McLaren F1s, with the 5th running Gulf car, several laps behind the race leader, becoming the final vehicle to be consumed by flame, and making quite a spectacle, with fire streaking out from its, well, everywhere, as it headed down what looks like the run to Arnage. One of the Courage cars, the one with fewer handling issues, therefore found itself promoted to 5th, and the class lead of GT2 remained in the hands of the temporarily wheelless 78 through to the end of the race. It was only 17 cars that finally took the checkered flag on Sunday afternoon, only one more car than had finished the 1992 race, but from a field more than 50% larger. Remarkably, though, the race concluded without a single safety car deployment or injury, and without any material arrival of any rain with which the French Classic is so frequently associated. Just a lot of barbecue. It was the second time Yost had won the race in back-to-back years with the same vehicle chassis. Previously, they had achieved the same feat in 84 and 85, and remains the last time for this particular feat to have occurred. It also marked the start of a collaboration between Yost Racing and Tom Christensen that would see them take a remarkable 6 Le Mans wins together. I'm counting the Bentley win because, although it was nominally Team Bentley, it was still supported by Yost mechanics and personnel. TK's brief dalliance with BMW came largely to naught in 1998 and 99, at least as far as Le Mans is concerned. The 911 GT1s would, of course, come back with improvements and take victory the subsequent year. Somewhat ironically, they won on reliability when the faster Mercedes and Toyota GT1s experienced reliability issues, but that's a story for a different video. That brings us to the end of a slightly shorter race report than the past few. As always, thank you for your time and attention, and if you'd like to suggest or request the subject for the next race report video, please do so in the comments below. Have a good evening, all.